Did you know the US Air Force's biggest transport plane has some amazing features and a surprising nickname? Meet FRED, the Lockheed C-5 Galaxy. This giant plane can kneel to the ground, turn its landing gear 90 degrees, reverse like a car, and even have seats that face backward. It can carry almost anything, from submarines to intercontinental missiles, though there's one surprising thing it can't. But here's the fun part. FRED doesn't just stand for effing ridiculous economic disaster. It's also nicknamed after a famous adult film star because of its ability to kneel and carry massive loads. Want to know more? Stick around to discover the full story and the incredible features that make FRED so unique. The birth of FRED. The C-5 was nicknamed FRED because of its high costs during development, caused by the US Air Force constantly changing its requirements. It also has other nicknames like Big Mac, Cumulus Illuminus, and even Linda Lovelace. That last name came from the C-5's ability to kneel and carry big loads from both ends, which reminded some of the actress known for her adult films. In the 1960s, Lockheed, Douglas, and Boeing competed to design the C-5 Galaxy. While Boeing's design was seen as better, Lockheed won with a cheaper option. But Boeing didn't lose out. They used their work on the C-5 to create the famous 747. Some think the 747 came from the C-5 program, but that's not true. The designs were very different. Now let's dive into more about FRED, just like how it can shift into reverse. However, there's a problem. While the C-5 can travel backward on the ground using reverse thrusters, it doesn't have a backup camera like modern cars. The solution? Open the rear cargo door, where a spotter sits to guide the process. With a slight advance of the throttles off idle on the reverse thrusters, FRED begins moving backward. Interestingly, there's no beeping sound when going in reverse, unlike trucks or other large vehicles. But here's the truth. Many aircraft can back up using their own thrusters. Examples include the old Saab 37 Viggen, military transport aircraft like the C-17 Globemaster, and the older C-130 Hercules. Similarly, commercial jets such as the DC-9 can also travel backward using reverse thrusters, although they rarely do. Reverse thrusters are primarily used during landing to decelerate by redirecting thrust. With some exceptions, civilian planes aren't allowed to use reverse thrusters to back up at airports, except in rare cases. This is because it can be dangerous. Debris can damage engines or hurt people nearby. It's also noisy and wastes fuel. Modern engines can't use reverse thrust safely unless the plane is already moving. But what about using reverse thrust in the air? On the C-5 Galaxy, this is normal. Pilots use reverse thrust on the two inner engines to help the plane descend faster, since its wings create so much lift that it doesn't want to come down. This method can make the plane drop at speeds of 10,000 to 18,000 feet per minute. The C-5 also has a 73-passenger deck above the cargo area. Interestingly, the seats face backward, and there's a good reason for that. The unique features. Back in the day, Lockheed discovered that rear-facing seats were actually safer for passengers compared to front-facing seats. Why? When aircraft come to a sudden stop, say during a crash, passengers can press their head and back against the seat, allowing the seat to absorb most of the destructive energy. But if it's safer, why don't commercial jets have backward seats? One reason is that forward-facing seats are more profitable for airlines. Backward seats need extra support to handle more pressure, making them heavier. This extra weight uses more fuel, which costs the airline more money. Lockheed chose backward seats for safety in the C-5, giving the crew a lounge, bunk beds, and a large washroom. By the way, I'd love to fly in a C-5, so if you have any connections, let me know. While the C-5 Galaxy is the largest cargo plane in the United States Air Force, it's not the largest in the world. That title belonged to the Ukrainian AN-225 Maria, which could carry 250 tons. Tragically, it was destroyed by Russian forces. However, reports suggest that a second Maria is being built in a secret facility, using components already manufactured. For now, the largest cargo plane is the AN-124 Ruslan, capable of carrying 150 tons. In comparison, the C-5 Galaxy can carry 125 tons, which is still impressive. That's equal to 25,844,746 ping pong balls. On a practical note, the C-5's cargo bay can fit one CH-47 Chinook tandem rotor helicopter or three AH-64 Apache helicopters. For Tetris lovers, removing rotor blades and stabilizers allows 6 Apaches to fit. It can also accommodate a Coast Guard boat, a Mark V Special Operations boat, or even the fuselage of a C-130. Additionally, the C-5 can transport 10 light armored vehicles weighing 12 tons each, 2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, or an A-10 Warthog. It also fits 36 standard pallets. As a strategic airlifter, the C-5 truly delivers. During Operation Desert Storm, C-5 Galaxies made up just 12% of the airlift fleet, but carried 44% of all airlift cargo. Remarkably, the U.S. Air Force even airdropped a Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missile from a C-5 while researching its potential as a platform for launching nuclear missiles. After the load was removed, the ICBM was released from its cradle. Then, the Minuteman engine started, showing that ICBMs can be launched from planes. But there was one thing Fred couldn't carry: the space shuttle. If you're wondering why the Boeing 747 could transport the space shuttle, but the C-5 couldn't, it all came down to the tails. The C-5 has a T-tail, which would have been affected by the airflow turbulence created by the shuttle. It was the 747's regular tail design that won this competition. The limits and surprises. Interestingly, even though the C-5 is capable of airlifting main battle tanks, it rarely does. FRED can transport 2 M1 Abrams tanks simultaneously, but the U.S. Air Force prefers not to. The first reason is that airlifting tanks are incredibly expensive and inefficient. A more practical method of transporting tanks and other armored vehicles over long distances is by rail or sea. As a result, tank airlifts are exceedingly rare, but they have occurred. The largest airlift of tanks using the C-5 Galaxy happened in 1973 during the Arab-Israeli War, when Israeli forces suffered heavy losses and needed resupplying. The U.S. government sent 29 M60A1s and M48A3s to Israel using C-5 Galaxies, while the remaining 200 units were transported by sea. Even though the C-5 could carry 2 tanks at once, it only carried 1 due to concerns about the airframe. Similarly, today, while the C-5s can transport 2 60-ton M1 Abrams tanks simultaneously, the sheer weight of these vehicles places significant stress on the airframe, which can prematurely wear out the airplane. For this reason, C-5s only carry 1 Abrams tank at a time, and only in cases of emergency delivery. Record-breaking feats and high costs. In June 1989, FRED set a world record by dropping 4 42,000-pound Sheridan tanks and 73 troops over Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The C-5 Galaxy is one of the most expensive planes to operate, costing nearly $100,000 per hour, mostly because it uses a lot of fuel. It can hold over 51,000 gallons of fuel, and sometimes it needs refueling while flying. Even though it's lighter than the Airbus A380, the C-5 has 28 tires to handle its heavy weight. This design lets FRED land on unpaved runways like snow and mud. Tests showed that after a few passes, it could easily drive on compacted soil or snow, making it perfect for rough areas. Finally, the C-5 can also take off from unpaved runways, often with most of the runway taking off as well. Several other considerations were taken into account when designing FRED's landing gear. One key aspect was the C-5's requirement for a wide center of gravity range, which allowed it to transport mixed loads. Secondly, Fred has a unique ability to kneel to minimum ground clearance, helping with cargo loading. As a result of this feature, having 4 nose tires helped spread the weight when loading heavy cargo, such as tanks. Additionally, kneeling is especially important as it lowers the cargo deck to the height of a truck bed, facilitating loading and unloading operations. These special requirements meant the landing gear assembly had to be designed to rotate 90 degrees before stowage to fit inside the fuselage. In case you're wondering how the tires are changed, you can either jack the entire aircraft up to perform maintenance on all the tires and brakes, or handle them individually, as each set of wheels can be raised for easy access. The C-5s were produced in 2 batches. One of these batches was, to say the least, defective. 81 C-5As were produced between 1968 and 1973, while 50 C-5Bs were produced between 1985 and 1989. The defects surfaced in the mid-1970s, when wing cracks were discovered in the C-5A fleet. As a result, the maximum weight of all C-5As was limited to 50,000 pounds. Between 1981 and 1987, 77 C-5As underwent a re-winging program costing $7.1 billion in 2023 dollars. The redesigned wings featured a newly developed aluminum alloy that didn't exist when the aircraft was first produced. These new wings provided a structural service life of over 50,000 hours. The C-5Bs, of course, were already built with the new wings and over 100 additional system modifications, significantly improving reliability over the legacy C-5As. In 1998, the U.S. Air Force decided to upgrade 52 C-5s to the C-5M Super Galaxy because most of the airframe's life was still left. The new C-5M had updated electronics, a glass cockpit, a new autopilot, and new engines, the General Electric CF6 engines. These engines, which have been around since 1971, are stronger and quieter than the older ones. The C-5M Super Galaxies are expected to stay in service until at least 2040. And that's a wrap on FRED, the giant that's both awe-inspiring and a bit quirky. From carrying tanks and troops to its impressive landing gear and upgraded engines, the C-5 Galaxy proves why it's still a key player in the U.S. Air Force. Do you think FRED's unique features make it the most impressive military aircraft? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the C-5 Galaxy, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more amazing content. Thanks for watching.